Start. Ready?
Let's go. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the September edition of Meet Our Contributors. This is our first session of the day. The next session will begin at 1 p.m. Pacific, and that's 8 p.m. UTC. Check your local time zone for that. Today, we're joined by three awesome contributors to Kubernetes, and also George, who is community manager. We'll do some introductions in a second. First things first, we do abide by the code of conduct that the CNCF has. So if you are in the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel right now, hanging out with us, or if you're on Twitter or anything like that, please be excellent to each other. Panelists, you are allowed to ask each other questions. Mentorship does not mean it's a one-way street, so feel free to ask each other any questions as well. And then let's see, I think that's it for me. My name is Paris. I work at Google. I'm a Kubernetes community manager. And let's go with some introductions. Joel, why don't you go first and tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved with Kubernetes and what you're up to now.
Okay, hi, I'm Joel. I work for a startup in Shoreditch, London, called Pusher. I'm a cloud infrastructure engineer, so my day-to-day mainly is running Kubernetes. We've got a bunch of products that run on top of the platform. So yeah, that's sort of where I got into Kubernetes. When I joined the company 15 months ago, I started working with Kubernetes, and since then have been sort of fixing bugs and stuff when I can, and contributing back as much as possible.
Yay for fixing bugs. Awesome. Eeyore?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jorge Castro. I'm a developer advocate at Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and I'm a Kubernetes contributor for around almost 3 years. I made my first contribution in November 2015. So yeah, I'm a contributor for almost 3 years. I'm a co-lead of co-chair of SIG-PM, the SIG that is focused on different aspects of product and program management within Kubernetes community. I'm not a developer. I'm not focused on developing code, but I'm here to help you with making decisions in any non-coding specifics in contributions to Kubernetes.
Thank you, Eeyore. And then Stefan?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I have to protect my camera from the cat who just arrived. I'm Stefan. I'm working for Red Hat as a developer, and I'm a remotee in Europe, so European time zone. I started with Kubernetes when I was freelancing for Mesos. Actually, they put me onto the Kubernetes project. I worked on that from, 3.5 years ago nearly. Did plenty of contributions in all areas. Recently, mainly focused on custom resource definitions, so the API server behind that, API server in general, API machinery, and a lot of reviews and approvals. You might have met me in GitHub approvals before and some reviews. Yeah, that's it.
Paris, you're muted.
Oh, of course I am. George, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jorge Castro. I work at Heptio as a community manager, and I'm just here to mostly stream and be in the background. So thanks everyone for joining us, and looking forward to a great session.
Thanks to George for making us live right now. This will also be recorded, so if you need to jump off for any reason because you're in a meeting or what have you, you can always check back with us in a few hours on the YouTube channel because we will have this broadcasted. All right, let's go into our first question. This is from a DM that I received on Slack. Also, for those who are watching and want to engage with us, We're in the Meet Our Contributor Slack channel on the Kate's instance. Also going to be checking Twitter periodically, but not as much as Slack. So if you hash your Twitter comment as K8SMOC for Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors, I will find it. Now, first question is, do you remember your first contribution? If so, what do you think it was and how was your experience? I think I see some folks looking up their GitHub history right now. So I guess the first question is, no, you probably don't necessarily remember it. Joel, how about you? Do you remember?
I think I actually do, yeah.
Oh, good.
As I say, it was only about a year ago. It was the cluster autoscaler. There was quite a large bug, which I actually fixed like on a Saturday because we saw it hit our production instances on the Friday evening, caused a page event, so someone got woken up. And then on the Saturday, I was like, that is a really big bug. We need to fix this. So I spent like all day Saturday hunting for it. I think what the bug was that if no, because it was part of the cluster autoscaler's dynamic discovery of autoscaling groups in AWS, if nothing matched, then it would return all autoscaling groups. So one of the cluster autoscalers that was running on one of our test clusters, someone had disabled all of the autoscaling groups from the cluster autoscaler, and then suddenly it had all of the autoscaling groups because of the way the AWS API works, and started randomly turning instances off in different clusters. So yeah, that was quite a big thing for us. And I remember spending a whole day looking for it and finding it. And at the end of the day, opened a PR back to it. And I remember one of the contributors, I can't remember the name now, but he was just like, okay, this fixes this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue. Because there were so many issues that had all like been opened, but no one had worked out quite what it was. So I was quite proud of that one. It was a good fun first sort of contribution to the community. But yeah, like it was well received. Like opened the thing, had to read all the docs on how to contribute and sign this CNCF, CLA and stuff. But yeah.
What was the hardest part of that process?
In terms of like opening the PR, like I found the contributing docs very terse. Like they were a bit hard to read, to be honest. I kind of sort of skimmed over bits of them because it just didn't seem relevant. But like there is the Kubernetes CI bot that tells you what to do most of the time anyway. So I think that's one of the things I've sort of got used to. It's like tells you to add approvers and stuff. So you just do as it says.
That's exactly how it's supposed to work. So that's awesome. Yeah. Also, Joel, and for everybody listening too, we did just release a few months ago a new contributors guide. Check that out and give us comments. Please, feedback is more than appreciated. If you want to give us direct feedback, file an issue, or feel free to visit us in the Kubernetes SIG Contribex Slack channel too. Always soliciting feedback. So Joel, I'd love to hear what you think is better or still needs work from the new doc. And then how about the rest of you? Stefan, do you remember your first contribution and what was the hardest part about it?
I remember my first contribution. If we're speaking about the GitHub contributions as well.
Correct.
Because in general, at Kubernetes community, we consider any kind of involvement into the community, including running meetups, local events, and also contributions. But definitely, I suppose that this question was about their GitHub contribution to Kubernetes code base. And my first contribution was fixing a few lines in documentation of Kubernetes. So as I mentioned before, I'm not a developer, but I'm a person with a strong DevOps experience. And a few years ago, I selected Kubernetes. I've started looking to Kubernetes as a good DevOps solution, first of all, for my personal purposes and for satisfying my engineering needs. And at some point of time, I figured out that some part of documentation was incomplete, and I found a way how can I submit, well, first of all, I found what I can submit there. I found a way how can I submit it to Kubernetes code base, because it was terribly easy, even comparing to the different open source projects I had experience working on. So that was my first contribution, just a few lines in documentation, but that was the amazing start for me, because I figured out that it was terribly easy, and it opened the doors for me to start working on another bug fixes in documentation and other bug fixes in different areas of Kubernetes code base, and even in the different areas of Kubernetes itself as an open source project.
Awesome. And docs are indeed a great way. I call them the gateway drug to the community, because it's easy for users to jump in and figure things out and figure out where holes are, and then also get used to how we do business. So that's definitely a good example, Eeyore. Thank you. And then Stefan, what about you?
So I didn't remember what it was, but I was able to look it up. PR 14,259, so like more than 50,000 PRs ago, so a very long time ago, was about just moving some code into a function. So basically refactoring, very simple, but it cleaned up the code and made it a bit better than it was before. So wasn't complicated. I think from my point of view, what is most complicated, maybe two things. The first one is to get reviewers to look at it, find the right persons. Luckily, we have owner files today. So there are files called owner, capital case, in nearly every package or some parent package. And you find the people who own that code or who somehow have knowledge and want to review it. And you can pick people from there and just ask them. And if nobody answers after a few days, there's Slack, ping them. And usually this helps somehow to get a review and get things into the code base to get it merged. The second thing, which I remember, maybe it's much better today, I'm not so sure, but if you want to change something, you have to test. And changing something just in the code and it compiles, that's fine, it's first step, but most importantly, get your development environment into a shape where you can really test a whole cluster. So there are ways using Docker in Docker. There is a script in the hack directory called local cluster, complete cluster, which can also launch pods. Get those ready on your notebook or on your computer, so you can test things. And last but not least, we have a lot of integration and end-to-end tests, which you can run even without Docker. So if you change something in the API server or in some controller, you can run them usually using integration or end-to-end tests. And this can be just done on your local notebook. You don't need much capacity for that. It's just a process which runs, maybe an etcd which you need. And if you know how to do that, it's getting much easier to really validate what you're changing. That's basically the most important step, I think, for a developer.
Two follow-up questions for you. One, for those that don't know what an owner's file is / why they need to look there, can you give them an explanation of that? And two, if folks are having issues with setting up their dev environment, where do you think is the best place to help them troubleshoot? So two questions there.
Yeah, maybe I start with the second question. Of course, you have Slack. So go to the Kubernetes dev channel. There are many people, and they are very helpful. That's a good point. There are plenty of blog posts, of course, and there's documentation. It's usually hard to find those things. So I cannot just give you a link now because I don't know either. So I have to Google for it or even ask in the Slack channel. So I think that's the best thing probably to do if Google doesn't help. The first question is about our process, how to get code into the project. We have a two-step process, so we need reviews. You want somebody to give you a so-called LGTM. It's a looks good to me comment in your PR on GitHub. And these are usually quite experienced people in the code base you are changing. And when they're happy with the code, after a few rounds of reviews, usually they will give this LGTM. And those people are mentioned in those files called owner. Owner, capital case, just look in the repository, they are laying around in the packages. The second step is approval. You need somebody who really owns the code, and these are many, or far fewer people who own the code, maybe 3 or so, or 2, maybe 5. And one of them at the end has to agree that this change is a good direction. He doesn't necessarily look into every detail you change, every comma, but he says this is a good direction you want to go to. And this is usually what you have to get at the end, and it's often harder to get. And again, ping those people if they don't answer after several days, then they usually do. Most of the people are approachable, so yeah. Usually, just as a background, just mentioning people in GitHub requests, in issues, mentioning people, this is usually not enough because there are so many notifications in GitHub that people just don't see your special requests. So don't be surprised if you just mention somebody and he doesn't answer. It's not that he doesn't want to answer. Maybe it's just he doesn't see that you wrote something and you request some information or some approval or something like that.
Awesome. Very good advice. Yes, we do have 50,000 people on our Slack instance. So there definitely is a lot of noise, as people consider, but at the same time, it's still very useful, and you will eventually get an answer from someone. There's also discuss.kubernetes.io. So if folks want to talk about their tips specifically for setting up their dev environment as well, that's a great place to do so. There's all types of tips and tricks. It sort of fills a gap between our official docs and Stack Overflow. So please feel free to use that as a resource to those listening. All right, next question has to do with our jargon. And what the individual means by that is, what is some of the terminology related to Kubernetes? Stefan just said one, which was LGTM. That kind of tripped you up in the beginning of your contribution process, or still trips you up and you have to look it up. What are some of those jargon terms and/or Kubernetes related words? One could be service. Anybody want to jump in? No? Everyone knew everything? Joel's laughing. Like,
I'm just trying to think of examples.
Yeah.
Like, as you say, service is a bit of a weird term. But it's like, because whenever I talk about running stuff on Kubernetes, I want to run this service on Kubernetes, but then you say service and you actually mean like a microservice. You don't mean a service. So that one does, like, that's a prime example of some weird terminology that Kubernetes gets. But yeah, I don't really know.
that's okay. Eeyore, what about you?
I remember that the first Kubernetes related term that was really confusing for me was pod. And it was really confusing because my initial assumption when I started looking to Kubernetes was that Kubernetes is managing containers. But I figured out in documentation that Kubernetes is managing pods. So I had to spend not so much time, but a bit time learning what the pods are and what is their difference with containers and with other objects in Kubernetes, and specifically what are the main reasons why Kubernetes uses pod but not containers, manages pod directly, not containers directly. Speaking about not the operational side of Kubernetes, but speaking about the contributor side of Kubernetes, I learned a lot of new words for me, including LGTM, which means looks good to me, PTAL, which means please take a look. People usually are mentioning this phrase in comments when they like to ask someone to look to something. And definitely lots of words which I don't recall today because they are my regular terms today. At the same time, if you, as a new contributor to Kubernetes, if you are looking to to the definition of some specific term that we have in Kubernetes, especially from the operational experience. I have to mention that we have the standardized glossary on Kubernetes.io website, where you can find all the common terms that we use in Kubernetes as the technology project and in Kubernetes as an open source project and community.
Awesome. And then Stefan, you, anything that initially tripped you up in the beginning with jargon terms or commands or anything along those lines?
I think there's plenty around testing. So we have a mechanism, it's called a submit queue, which collects all PRs which are approved and LGTM'd. It's retesting everything, and your PR has to go through the submit queue, and there are certain rules for it, like everything should be green, of course, every test should be green. Not every, because there are exceptions. So some tests are optional, they are not activated in the submit queue. Anyways, everything around this testing, it's not trivial because it's pretty huge. And if something goes wrong, it's very hard to understand, is it your fault? Often it is, but often it's not your fault, it's just a flake. We call it a flake when something goes wrong, which just goes wrong every once and then. So every, 100 run or something like that. And it shows up in your PR and you are lost and you have to debug. And you can usually do retest with your PR and hope it goes away. And if it was not your fault that you introduced this flake, this is fine. Maybe it comes back, then you should maybe look a bit deeper. Yeah, so those testing things, I think if they change something, our awesome test team or the group around testing, still today, it's sometimes, yeah, it's complicated to really understand what's going on and if something is wrong to debug it. Then there's the term of SIG. I think this is also very special in our community, special interest groups. So at some point, we noticed that not everybody can understand everything and discuss everything. So we introduced special interest groups. I think there are 26 or something like that nowadays for many topics. And just look through the list. They are documented. I'm not sure where exactly. Paris can help me, I guess. And look for those which are interested for you and just join them and listen once a week or every 2 weeks, depending on the SIG, and listen to the discussions and get to learn the people around and what are the hot topics. And if you have a new topic, bring it in and let it be discussed there. Yeah.
Awesome. That was great explanation. Thank you for that. All right, we do have a semi-large question asked. So what I'm going to do is see if you all can do it. If not, it's fine because we can do it on a next session. But an individual in the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel wants to know if you can talk about the Kubernetes repo, specifically tips on how it's laid out, if you can talk about the directory structure, etc. And maybe we could do like a screen share and you could talk through it. If that's something that you feel comfortable with, we can do it. We still have like 20-ish minutes left to broadcast. But what I can do now is ask another question and you can think about if you can answer that. So I'm going to pause that question and go to another one. And in the meantime, if anybody wants to kind of take a quick look through KK, that's what we call it for the speaking of jargon. If anybody wants to look through that and see if you can talk to it, that would be awesome. So next question is an easy one. The easy one is, is this the only open source project you contribute to? If not, what are the other ones? And B, why Kubernetes? Meaning, why contribute to Kubernetes? There's hundreds, thousands of open source projects. Why this one?
Can I be the first?
Yep, take it away.
Yeah, so I would say that Kubernetes is my primary open source project where I contribute to. As a developer advocate for CNCF, we have not only Kubernetes, but around 20 other projects. And I'm not contributing to the code base to all of them, but I am also contributing to some of them in the different ways. At the same time, Kubernetes was their first project which I've picked up as an open source project which I'd like to contribute to on a regular basis. I had experience with the different projects, and I was not really excited about the openness of them and the community orientation of them. So Kubernetes was my choice a few years ago because of its openness and the way how can you get started from their early beginning. How can you get started as a person who never contributed anything to any popular open source project? What can be your successful path and so on. So that was the reason why I chose Kubernetes, because it's pretty open. We are an open community and we welcome everyone. And I forgot, Boris, what was the second part of the question?
It was, are there any other projects you contribute to, and then why Kubernetes? So it sounds like you covered the why.
Okay, yes. I would also mention another reason why should you consider contributing to Kubernetes, not only because of the community openness, but because of the project popularity from the technology perspective. So today, Kubernetes is one of the most highest velocity projects in the world, in the global world of open source, and it can be compared only with a few open source projects like Linux, Chromium, Node.js, or just a few. And if you're contributing to Kubernetes, you are definitely contributing to the upstream of the technology.
Awesome. And then any of our other panelists contribute to other open source projects?
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I've actually contributed to a few other projects around the same sort of space in terms of projects that we're using within our Kubernetes infrastructure at Pusher. So there's one called CoreOS Dex that's a sort of OIDC proxy because we use sort of single sign-on. I've actually contributed some PRs up to that as well. Another one in a similar space, the Bitly OAuth proxy that we've contributed to. And as well as that, we actually have a few open source repos ourselves. So again, similar sort of space, all stuff to do with how we run our Kubernetes projects, but you know, we're writing these tools, custom controllers, that kind of thing. Why not share them with other people? Why not have them have the ability to go and use our code? You know, like what's the point in us solving a problem if and not sharing it and making someone else solve the same problem? So yeah, I'm quite passionate about doing that and been really pushing it for open sourcing as much as we can to push it in terms of our infrastructure code. But yeah, it's sort of the why Kubernetes is just because I work on it day to day. I spend my 40 hours a week working with Kubernetes, so I'm going to see problems in it, and you know, occasionally I'm bored at the weekend and start seeing what I can do.
Awesome. And then Stefan, do you want to answer that? And then it sounds like you are ready to go with sharing your screen for Kubernetes too, so we can take both away.
Yes. So yeah, similar like the one before. So I contribute to a lot of projects around Kubernetes. So not everything is in Kubernetes. So there are many repositories which I touch here and there. And of course, I'm working for Red Hat, so there's OpenShift, some product on top of Kubernetes, and I'm contributing there as well, all open source, of course. Yeah, so I would try to share the screen. Let me see. Here we go.
Stefan share his screen for a previous question that was addressed in the Meet Our Contributors. The individual wanted a little bit of a sort of a quick code base tour, if you will, of the directory structure and things like that.
Yeah,
Right.
so I won't talk about all of those directories. There are like 20 here. I pick a few. Yeah, let's start maybe with this package, PKG. That's the main package where all, not all, but traditionally there was all code of Kubernetes. Basically everything which made the Kubernetes project was here. Nowadays we've moved out a lot. You will see in a second where other things are today. But here you still find a lot of things. So for example, if I go here into package controller, you will find a whole list of controllers. Controllers might be a term for you, controllers are operators, and those are those for Kubernetes resources. For example, you find all the replica set logic here or deployment logic. So for the resources you know from Kubernetes, all the business logic behind the scenes, everything that the controller manager is doing, this is here in this directory, like 30, 40 different controllers. I don't go into the details here, but those are really interesting if you want to learn from code. Just look into replica set, for example, and see how replica set, the logic of replica set is implemented in Kubernetes. I talked about owner files. So here's one of those owner files, just owners in plural, capital case, and you see we have 4 approvers and 1 reviewer. And this owner file is valid for all subdirectories under controllers if there is no other owner file which replaces this one. So those 4 people can approve your changes in controllers. That's what it means. And David Dietz, my colleague, he wants to review your changes. If you change something, for example, here in replica set, maybe there's another owner file which replaces the higher level one. They are different people. So there are just 3 approvers and 4 people who want to review changes in here. Controllers, as I said, very important, quite a lot of code. We have APIs spread around. So here's something called APIs. I will not talk much about that because there's a better place to look for that. But you find all APIs here, but not those APIs which you actually use. So I don't want to dive too much into this package structure. It's pretty huge. I go back to the top level and show where the other code is. So package, there's a lot of code. We have CMD, which are the commands. So if you go into CMD, of course, you find things like Hypercube. So if you have started a cluster yourself, you have probably used Hypercube before. Everybody has used kube control. So kube control is the top level file for the command kube control. So there's probably a main function, not much more. And all those binaries you find here. So it's pretty easy to get an entry point if you look for how something works in Kubernetes. So CMD and package we have. This hack directory, hack is a bunch of scripts. Scripts you have to use if you want to do changes. For example, when you change something quite often, you have to update something. You have to update generated code. And here you find all those update scripts. There's an update all. You can run that. Takes like 40 minutes or so. And then everything is updated. Takes long. It works, yes. But usually, so I never call that. I usually see from CI, which is running against my PRs, what must be changed or must be updated, and then I run the right script. So here's a bunch of, 30 different update scripts. For example, if there's code gen involved, so you change something and there must be a change in a client or in some API code or deep copy code, this is the file to call. For a newbie, of course, if you're new in this code base, it's hard to really tell which one must be run. So maybe it's easier to run just update all after you notice that your PR is not green because something is missing. So update all is a very important one. And there are a couple of test scripts here, how to run test for integration or just go test, unit tests. All of those are documented as well. So if you look for those scripts here in the repository, you also find some documentation. Last but not least, there is a staging directory. So if you have programmed anything in Kubernetes, you probably know a couple of those sub projects. So client Go is a very prominent one. It's our client, basically. The API one here, Kate S API, it includes all APIs we expose, which can be used by third parties. Those repositories, they are inside of our main repository. So if I dive into the staging here, staging source, KSIO, you find all the source code. So you, for example, you find the client Go source code and you can change it. So if you want to change something, do it here in the staging. those directories, all those directories under staging, they're exported to the real directories under GitHub. So I hope you can see that. If I go here into Kubernetes Client Go, this is what you use in Go code if you program against our API. It's just a copy of what you find inside of the staging. So staging is the prime instance of the source code. So if you change something, do it here. But if you consume our repositories, do it in the actual published repository. So under GitHub Kubernetes Client Go. As I said, there are a couple of them. Some of them you see here. There's API machinery we usually use. There's API server if you program an API server. Those are very important. A lot of them are libraries, so they're very core in Kubernetes, very internal. Yeah, just browse them. We don't have enough time to really talk through them here. Take a look, browse the code. In general, this is, yeah, it's one suggestion. Kubernetes is huge, so the code base is really huge. Try to get ready some kind of debugger, some IDE like VS Code or like Golang. Try to get a debugger working. This helps a lot to really trace when something happens, where it happens. Yeah, I think it's a very important hint to really find your way through this code base. Don't be afraid. It's big. It takes time. It takes time for everybody to really find the way through it. Yeah, maybe the last thing I want to mention, we have plenty of those are the tests which are run in CI against your pull request. We have many unit tests, of course. Unit tests, as usual in Go, they are just files inside of the packages. And then we have, in addition, something that's also an acronym, of course, we use end-to-end. So it's end-to-end tests are those which are running against the real cluster. So I know, I just pick one here, storage, you find everything about storage. So for example, what do we have here? If you want to use NFS, here are complete end-to-end tests running against a real complete Kubernetes in a real deployment on GCE, on AWS or something like that. Next to end-to-end tests, we have integration tests. So there's one directory under tests, it's called integration. They are more than unit tests, but they are not running against a complete cluster. So they are kind of artificial. Sometimes they use an API server, but they don't use pods. They don't use containers at all. So they are a level between unit tests and end-to-end tests. And you see they are nicely sorted according to some topics. So if you, I know you want to change something in the quota handling, there are good chances that there's a quota directory here, and for quota, this is the case. So here are quota tests, for example. Depending on the topic you are working on, just look in this directory if there is something. Often there is. Anything else? Yeah, I think this is a good overview. There's much more about it. Take your time, browse code, use a debugger to really see what is going on in a real process. That's maybe the best tip I have here.
That was an awesome tip and awesome tour, by the way. So this was our first impromptu tour on Meet Our Contributors. So thank you so much for doing that. And for those listening, we are more than welcome to do things like that in the future. If you just give us a 24 plus hour lead time, we can make sure folks like Stefan, Joel, Eeyore are on the line to best answer those. Thank you again for that. All right, I have more questions than we have time for, so I'm going to do those in the order that they came in. Let's see. Oh, Nikita has a question and Meet Our Contributors. What are your suggestions for reviewers? How does one become a good reviewer? And also, she said, etc. But I know some other folks in the channel were also talking about how even members, which is the first rung on our ladder, can review. So what's the point of an owner's file as a reviewer? So that's a multi-pronged question there. Anybody want to take that? Stefan, I know you have made your way up the ranks. what is your opinions on what makes a good reviewer?
So reviewers, they make sure that the quality of code is on the right level. Like they really go every little change you do, every line usually you do. They might look picky sometimes or pedantic, but this is important somehow because if everybody follows any kind of style without any uniformity, the whole project gets harder to maintain. So there's a reason for that. Reviewers usually they want to improve code. Sometimes it's about taste. This can happen, but they have very positive intentions usually. So it's fine to discuss things or to say, this is maybe not my opinion or it's a different style. That's all fine. But they have good intentions to improve code. And this brings me to maybe the second part of the question, how to get a reviewer. I had a recent case where somebody wanted to review code in API server, and he just created a PR and put himself into the reviewer file, into his owner's file of the API server. And of course, this didn't have success because we didn't know this person. This is not necessary, but the best way to become a reviewer, an official reviewer, whatever this means, just start reviewing. Look in some component you care about, you really deeply care about, and just start reviewing any kind of PR. Everybody is happy about reviews. That's very important. Everybody is happy about reviews. The worst thing for contributors is they contribute something, they push something, a PR, and nobody cares. So if you review, that's already the first step, and it's very good for the people who contribute code. And don't be frightened if the person who pushes something is a well-known person in the project. Do your best, give your review. If you see something, start with things which are maybe not so deep. Just apply your knowledge. If you think this is not good style in Go, comment on it. And get known in this component. That's as easy. If you have done 10 reviews or 20 reviews in this component, and then you make a PR against the owner file, everybody will agree because everybody is happy to get more reviewers. Reviewers are good for the project. They increase velocity and they make the life of everybody contributing better, basically. Approver is the next step. So if you want to be owner and approver, this means you must be reviewer for at least a few months and you must be well known and accepted to be some kind of instance as a reviewer for this component. But this is the same way, just do reviews, very many reviews, good quality, proves that you know the code, that you give value back as a reviewer, and then you can become approver. That's the same way it works.
And then Joel, are you a reviewer in any owners files? No?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
No.
well, different type of question for you on the same tip. What are some good qualities of current reviewers that you've seen that you've been impressed with?
People will often come back and be like, because what I find is when I open PR, someone will come back and they'll initially question the motive and then look at the code. I think that's good because they don't waste their time looking at the code if the motive is wrong. Like if they've got any questions about what the code is going to change first, then if you're going to be reviewing code, you don't want to be reviewing it and not actually understanding what's going on. Explaining your decisions as well is a very good thing. So I had a PR with a comment yesterday, and the guy came back and he was like, oh, well, why not do it this way? And gave a really in-depth explanation of why that way might be better. I've had reviews in the past where they've not been like that. And it's just been like, I've had to go back to them and be like, what do you mean? So if you are reviewing and you want sort of a change or something, doing a good in-depth explanation can be very helpful to the original PR owner. Yeah.
Does anyone want to give any shout outs, individual shout outs, any good reviewers that they know? Not to put you on the spot, but feel free to give a shout out to anyone that you see that's doing good reviews. I know Eeyore is a good reviewer for the community repo. He is an issue triage captain there. So that's my shout out personally. Stefan, do you want to give any shout outs to anyone that you see doing great reviews?
So I personally like reviewers who are very reliable, like they come back to your questions. And you can just rely on them to answer everything you write within, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 days. It's awful when you write something and then there's silence for 3 weeks or 3 months. There are a couple of them. As my colleague, Jordan Nidrit, for example, he's one of the most awesome reviewers. Just the volume he does is incredible, and also the quality is very important. He just sees things in your code which you didn't think about at all, and improves your code. But there are many, many other reviewers. Many of them are overloaded, so this is my main problem, I think. So there are a lot of people who are today in poor files, but they don't have the time to really look on every PR. That's why I say we want more reviewers. They bring a lot of value.
Jordan is indeed awesome. He was on our last month's edition, and I think one of his questions was personally towards him of how do you do it? How do you manage your time? So if folks are interested in checking out how Jordan managed his time, check out last month's episode. All right. So now let me go to our next question here. All right. Is there a way to see which code gen scripts need to be run locally before hitting CI?
So I can answer it very briefly, very short. No, there is no automatic way. I said update all always works, but this takes ages. So I think it's just experience. Look at the output of CI. So I call update scripts before I submit something where I know it changed, but it happens every second time or more often that something is missing. So I have to call something after CI is read. Just look at the output, and usually this gives you a hint. I don't think there's much more one can say. Our CI is pretty good in catching missing updates, so this is pretty good, but still you have to look into log files. We don't have an artificial intelligence which derives the scripts you have to run. This would be cool, but I haven't seen anything like that.
All right. I've got a ton of questions. I'm just trying to make sure I answer the ones that came in first. Lots of conversations going on in the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel. So if folks also want to follow along there, but great conversation going on about qualities of reviewers. Definitely check that out. And I think it's mostly all conversation.
There are also a few questions about mentoring programs, and probably you, Paris, can be the best person to highlight a few of them that we currently have.
Yep. There was some questions about, does Kubernetes have a buddy mentor system for new contributors? One of them is this, that we're all on. I think what we've been trying to experiment with is how can we break down the old walls of mentoring. What I mean by that is having one mentee, you have dedicated time for them. One person probably gets too busy, and then you kind of fall out of contact. So this program specifically is helping both parties with time. And usually when folks say they need a mentor, it's usually just to get ramped up. Or they have some specific questions about their path and things like that, which this program can definitely take care of. One of the other things that we're trying to build right now that's closely resembling a buddy / mentor relationship is called the one-on-one hour. and that's intended to do one pre-planned activity. So for instance, a code-based tour, which Stefan just did, for 1 hour with one contributor. So that will answer a lot of questions in sort of a burst format. So we are in the middle of developing that. We ran a few tests, and the tests had some quirks that we need to do. For instance, how do we agree upon an environment to do pair programming? I didn't think, I was just like, oh, let developers figure it out on their own. Well, apparently there are millions of ways to pair program. So we're trying to figure out how to suggest the best way. We also have Google Summer of Code and Outreachy. Both of those are third-party mentoring initiatives. Third party being there's another party involved that manages the relationship, but Kubernetes gives projects to those, with Google Summer of Code being a more traditional internship-based summer program through Google. And then Outreachy, which helps some underrepresented folks get voices within open source where they may not have gotten it necessarily on their own. And that's an awesome program too. And if those who are potential mentors listening, we will be putting a call out for the Outreachy winter program. And we have done both Google Summer of Code as well as Outreachy. So we've tested both, and both are good to go. And then we'll also have group mentoring eventually, which is an awesome program that will help mentors do mentoring in groups for SIGs that are in need of a certain level. So for instance, if your SIG is in need of more reviewers, we can do a group of members to reviewers type of a cohort class. So that is coming as well. There's about 7 programs that are either in development or launched at this point. I'd consider this one launched, same as Google Summer of Code and Outreachy. So 3 of those programs are in the works. We do need lots of help on the process design and program design side for those. So if anybody's listening that wants to help out with that, please come to Contributor Experience and talk to me, and we can definitely work something out there. All right, and I know we have less than 2 minutes left, and I think I do have one more question. It is Stephanie sort of already answered it, and the question is, why always EDE testing?
Because things break. You change something very little, very innocent, and things break. That's so easy. Kubernetes is a huge system, and most of the code, which is used in many places, it's just very sensitive to changes. And not even the best developers within Kubernetes, the best gurus we have, they even don't know what some change can influence in the whole system.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up today's session. For those that did not have a question addressed during this session, whether you're in my direct messages or in the Slack channel or in my Twitter direct messages, we will get to you on the next session. And again, the next session will feature 7 out of 12 of our steering committee members. P.S. I heard they have an election coming up. So it might be good to ask all of your governance why questions. Why do we do this? What's the history of this thing? What are some of their regrets? And anything goes type questions. Thank you so much to our panelists today. You all are awesome. Particularly my favorite was obviously the code-based tour, because that was cool. Joel, is so nice meeting you for the first time. Eeyore, thanks for being a regular for the European time zones. George, thanks so much for YouTube streaming. And panelists, if you could stay on the line after we stop streaming, that would be awesome. And George, cut it.